to start a little bit with the exhibition in Brussels, the Signal to Decay exhibition. And one of the things that I think kind of was remarkable about it, in terms of the way it's laid out and in terms of the way that it's organized, is it's partially inside the gallery, but some of the audio is coming from outside of the gallery as well. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that notion of materiality and how you bring that into audio, both in this exhibition, but maybe more generally if you have certain ideas about that.
Yeah. Well, it's the idea to try and keep the installation quite organic and free-flowing. So the key thing was to make sure that there was an element that was ever-changing, that it wasn't a static, fixed signal, that it's actually growing through the days and the weeks, months it's on there. So people's experience of it was different at each time, at each juncture. So that was a sense of like you bring in the outside signal, and that's playing with the sound that's already fixed on its own cycle in the space. So that was the key thing, which was taken from the Goldsmith show and carried over to the Belgium. So there is some in the soundtrack. There's some sound from London mixed in to the sound piece that's made upstairs specifically for Belgium. So there's that sense of a ghost signal of the past played back in the body of the piece, which is always reflecting the sound of the city back in on itself again. So that was what was going on.
Certainly, and in terms of this juxtaposition of like the history of the piece, obviously this is volume 4 of the Signal to Decay series. Obviously, I've only seen the Argos show in person, but in terms of like the wider scope of it, if there's anything you'd like readers to kind of know about the Signal to Decay project that you'd like to say, just let me know.
No, it's just basically just reflecting on sort of past works that I've sketches and drawings that I've made. And pieces that didn't fit into film projects, and now it's just finding a respective environment to replay itself again, or relocate itself in a different context. So it's constantly developing or reworking, depending on the spaces that it goes to. So it's always trying to take an element of the past events and remix that into a new version. So that's what I'm basically concerned with. And it's the opportunity to sort of...
No, go right ahead.
No, it was an opportunity to sort of reflect on some imagined pieces that never got made, and now been in situations to start constructing them and making them happen, and refix it, because there's the vinyl releases and then there's the drawings and the prints and that kind of stuff. So there's loads of different sort of modelling of the pieces.
Certainly, and some of this visualization of audio is, of course, a key component of it. And I was wondering if you in terms of like your approach over the years, you've moved from moving image soundtracking to just basically audio-only recordings to soundtracking and stuff like that. And I'm just wondering, in terms of your own experience of the way sound has changed over that time, working with sound and relating sound to imagery and relating sound to space. Obviously, the rise of digital has been a big component of that, and it's freed up, perhaps in some ways, some of the kinds of works you can make, but also like legal technologies like copyright and stuff, restrictions have been also imposed. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that tension and how that's evolved over the course of your practice.
It's moved along because it's actually, before it's like using reel-to-reel cassettes. We've gone through so many different sort of elements, like from even CDs, compact discs, sort of, and DAT tapes. So trying to find a medium that you could hold the idea of capture the sound and find a way of manipulating it or re-editing it. So like before, we're using the reel-to-reel, we'd be cutting up tapes, and then you'd have to sync it to, either picture or to on a mixing desk sort of thing, so you can align it. Now we can do most of these things on the computer, and you can actually see the sound waves where you can actually make the loop or make the edit to make, because always the problem with the loops was always the cut. And it seemed like you get that glitch, and then it was like, so now how do you smooth that out? How do you make a perfect loop, which is like you it's the repetition was seamless, or the join was seamless. So you didn't get a sense of there was a 30-second, and that broke the magic. So if you're able to find a way of actually making that loop sort of seamless, it made the sound quite ethereal and it's endless. So the technology enables that, has now enabled it to be a lot more easier to sort of manipulate the sound in that way. But also the quality is shifted as well, because either it's too smooth without any depth or feeling of anything. So you have to sort of find a way of making it more gritty, or playing around with the digital and analog sort of systems is what's going on now. So it's a mixture between using the computer and going back and finding analog equipment or effects pedals or reel-to-reel reels to try and get that sort of texture, I guess, in the sound that you can work. So I have no problem working between cross platforms. It just makes it's just making it just that little bit more easier, more self-contained. Before you'd have to be worrying about trying to have time in the studio, and that was too expensive, and you had to go there with a clear idea about what you wanted to do, because it was like it was on you're on the meter. You had to spend you have to spend a couple of hours or whatever. And that's going to be costly to experiment, to try things out. So now it's a lot more easier to sort of be more experimental and to test things out without that the added cost of coming up with a solution.
Certainly,
so it's still interesting. It's still interesting to find, test things out, and make mistakes or put things away, and then find a way of really incorporating it back into later on.
And
so using the phone to record sound.
No, so sorry. I think there is a delay, ironically, in our recording. But one of the things that I guess, in terms of speaking about some of the way that the sounds have come together, I mean, obviously the sound piece in Belgium upstairs with the video piece, and that you move around the space and you get different parts of this story or this kind of sonic texture that you're immersed in. And I was wondering, because it is quite expansive and there's archival materials there as well. I mean, maybe if you'd want to maybe speak about where you sourced some of these materials, or what some of the most interesting things for you were to find as you were putting the piece together, because obviously there is multiple registers of voice going on, and of course multiple historical narratives as well. I mean, if you could take us into that a little bit, that'd be great.
I have to say thanks to a researcher that's in Belgium. They'll bring together some of the interviews of some of the people that are in the piece, and then setting up the connections between some of the buildings around the area that's stimulated, which is in the film piece as well, the video piece. It's just like that sort of harvesting of a material that is specific to that particular period of Belgian history, and then there's following the crumb trails basically, but still trying to make it personable. That is about people. And that's the sort of thing which I was the bit that I was interested in, is that sort of sense of that there's the voice of the people, but the bodies are not there, if that makes sense. It's like it's the remnants of where people were, or it's in their voice you're hearing their experiences of those particular moments, or from a particular point of view as well. So that's interesting. So there is a ghosted thing. There is a sense of like the building is leaking out the voices of the past. In a way, there's a sense of there's a ghostly presence of a part of serious memory. So that was one of the things I was interested in, and using the classic text and having an academic deconstruct parts of that text was also really a part that I was interested in, against that sense of like that great journey into the hinterlands of Africa. So it had all of that sort of quality to it. So yeah, and the sense that you're hearing through different sounds through the building. So there's the soundscape in the box, which is the soundscape that we made. The footage was shot in Scotland, and that again is about that sort of the sense of leaving, and then the soundscape in the centre, and then the video piece was obviously made from material that we collected when we came to visit in Belgium. So there's this sort of organic conversation between those two images and the sound piece, and then the sound of the street as now playing inside that as well. So it's a series of layers, and then you get a slow pulsating signal from downstairs from the kinetic sculpture, which is just that sort of drone over the banana leaves. And that again is the sense of like the remnants of what was left behind on the continent, which is because when the bananas were brought to the drying factory, the leaves would have been the thing that was left behind. They wouldn't have packed it, they would have just bagged the bananas and cut them down. But the leaves would be again the sort of the skin, the legacy of the colonial body in that space. That's what's going on. It is a sense that you're hearing the ghostly wail of the past against the sort of ever-changing quality sound and the material of the leaves. As they dry out, they change colour, sort of gradually drying out and turning brown. So it's just again the sense of like there's a textural kind of play, but you're hearing the sound through different points of engagement, if this makes sense. Like you're hearing bits of downstairs, or you may hear a siren from a police car that goes past, or somebody walking, or a car or something. So you're hearing bits like on the periphery of focus, but it mixes into the wider body of the piece. So that's one of the things I was interested in, literally making the building vibrate with the sonic history or traces of this historical relationship. That is roughly what is going on.
Of course, and then this idea that you're kind of touching on there, I think, of bringing a history into a physical space, or bringing a past into a present, even though there's like a vanished dimension. One of the things I guess I've always been struck by about Black Audio Collective's work, and of course your own independent work, is this this capacity to dig into an archive and know that an archive is incomplete. And of course, a lot of things have been written out of archival histories, and that retrieval process, that discovery process, that retrieval process, and then the reconstruction process is of course like one of, I think, the most profound elements of of what I think those works kind of touch on. And I'm just kind of interested in like how because now of course those works, the earlier Black Audio Collective works, and now your own a career in this field, there is an archive of your own work, and I'm wondering, in terms of like how you're seeing, having now lived a life where your own work has entered into a canonical archival place. I'm interested in how you see the archive now, or like how you see this process, because I mean, obviously, when you're young and you're exposed to this huge, amount of stuff, obviously it can seem overwhelming, and now you become part of that. Could you talk a little bit about that process of being being in an archive?
Yeah. It's funny. I don't. It's not a thing that I think about every day. Because what I'm doing, is kind of like what we're going to make next. What would be interesting to investigate, or even read. Only now it's been able to access or find material that you think can disappear and still be interested or be excited by the possible thing. Because it's not a fixed thing. We're trying not to say this is the fixed narrative or the only one to say. It's the thing that you're ever always engaging with, or getting insights on new bits of information, or new analysis, or new points of engagement, and finding, okay, what if? And then somebody else will take that material and they could come up with a different kind of a different interpretation, or another interpretation. So it's ever growing. So it's not like for me. It's not. So it doesn't feel like it's a fixed moment. It's like still growing, or still learning from an understanding of the material and what that can mean, and how that reflects on the present day. How people sort of have amnesia, and then have to be reminded that there were other occasions. And there's still things to be discovered, because the paperwork is there in the archives, and it's then each time each audience or each person will come to the archive with their own set of questions or analysis of that material, and it's that approach to say, okay, well, it's still there, it's still open for interpretation or open to reflection, to see where we stopped or where it's continued, or what was said in the past. Is it still being said now? Is there lessons that we still to be learned, or repeating those same mistakes again? So that's the key thing, and then finding them interesting elements of material to start you thinking, this would be a thing. Because now my interest is like the idea of sonic architecture, how to make a building vibrate or resonate with its sonic history, and how you can make that fluid through the space. We're not being confrontation, but this understanding of what it is to be human, and that is the condition that we're engaging in. But to still feel enthusiastic and excited by the potential understandings or lessons that can be learned for myself and other people who are interested in that sort of material. That's the big.
Certainly, and I guess one of the things that, like, when I think about, again, this movement through the archive, this historical archive that makes up so much of the sonic character of a lot of the work, this idea of bringing a diasporic perspective, or this notion of like the break that's spoken of in Fred Moten, this thing where there's a rupture between what you have and what the context from which these things were developed, or within which they existed, was. And I'm wondering, because obviously you are creating context through installation and through multiple interactions of interior exteriority, materiality and immateriality. And I'm just kind of wondering about, like, approaching this rupture, and constructing something new from it. What's that process? Do you have a sense of an insight into that? Or is that something that's conscious, or is it something that kind of emerges as you create the textures?
I think it emerges as you're building the textures and building the layers, and mostly these pieces are site specific. It's what's related, what I feel around the space, which we feel will work for that particular concept or environment, and it's trying to be respectful of that. And also, there's a sense of like there is a legacy of trying to understand. Getting an insight for what people were trying to do when they built the pieces being constructed, and how people relate to those pieces now. Again, the monuments debate is close. It's putting the monuments around the city mark out the different historical events, the First World War, Second World War, and the kings and queens. But it's also like the absences inside of that again. So it's like, okay, well, it's built on something, but it's not talking about the working class in any way. Or there's the monuments to the working class near the docks, or the dockers, sort of, but it's sort of stoic kind of men and women sort of thing. But then it's done as a propagandist kind of, sort of the ideal man and ideal woman sort of looking lovingly up as a buff guy. Okay, but that's to try and convince the community that they're okay. It's okay. But then there's another part to that conversation that's it's not there, and it's not memorialized in any way. So how do you comment on that or have that kind of conversation? Because people left to go and do things in other places, and it's pretty rough. But then that's not what's been acknowledged. But then people are living in the space now that their ancestors or relationship. So there's it's that blend, I guess I'm trying to make a sense of, because the buildings or the markers or the monuments are still, I think, dealing with that legacy, because how one society sees itself may not be the way that the rest of another set of communities will see it, and they may have a different kind of relationship to it, but there's no monument to that conversation.
Yeah, that's actually specifically a question I was going to ask about that. I mean, obviously, to say that it's a fraught history of Belgian colonial history is very much an understatement. It's one of the most brutal histories imaginable. And in terms of that, obviously, Belgian history is very selective about what it memorializes, as you were just saying moments ago. This idea of reckoning with that. I'm wondering what it was like while you were kind of in that space, to not so much like to, because obviously there are gaps in an archive or gaps in history, but then there's the stuff that's deliberately erased or like made to not know, and I'm wondering, like, your own experience with that process, like what was that like, and what were some of the things that maybe you discovered or found interesting about it, or powerful, or potentially interesting?
Well, okay, one of the things it made me think about is, like, what does Freud make of this? What does Freud make of the society that has gone through this period, but then they when they're confronted with a black cat, free cat, they start to shake, or they have nightmares. So it's a sense of that. Then, how do people rationalize that part of themselves that they put to one side, and so we're not going to look at this.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that must show itself in a psychosis, I guess. So some sort of. I don't think it's gone away.
Mm.
I think it means that the collective thing means how you move through the world, you present yourself in a certain way, and then the world looks at you and thinks, but you've got why are you always twitching? There's something that you're trying to suppress that thing, but it shows itself. That's the thing that I find interesting. I'm not walking around the space thinking there's markers, but there's sort of like it's okay. But we're part of a wider European conversation. But that's also a thing in and of itself, because this was a particular thought out and beneficial engagement. And I'm sure there's still traces of that still through the governmental or the politics. So it hasn't gone away, but it's just a question of how do people deal with it, how they deal with seeing this object or the subject of those people in their society as well, amongst them. And it's that idea that they go to religion or they try to find a way of rationalizing what's happening, or you either say, well, it was in the past, it wasn't me, but the benefits of that enable you to have a certain kind of lifestyle, a certain economic sort of stability. Well, on the other hand, these guys are not, but this place is a mineral-rich space which is not benefiting the people living in it.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a question still to be asked of, like, how, that same thing, how can you live with yourself? How can we collectively live with ourselves knowing this? And what do we do to change that? But again, people done these things knowing full well that it will benefit them and disenfranchise other people. So that is a sort of a concern, because that shockwave is still going through society now. It's still the past is ever with us. That's basically it is.
And indeed, and I guess leading to that is one of the things I did want to also ask about in the work, and also, and again, like more widely in your work with Black Audio Film Collective, and henceforward, this notion of subject creation, like obviously the colonial subject in both sides of the subaltern or whatever, so pseudo master class or whatever, have been created. They've been engineered. Like there's a form of engineering that's taken place, and of course the diasporic subject is another kind of subject, and realizing it, and of course then expressing an identity. And I'm kind of just interested in how that process has worked for you, this notion of both subjective recognition, realizing how your own subjectivity has been formed, and also how when finding your voice as an artist, how are expressing that, but also like maybe calling forth new kinds of subjects through your work. I mean, has that played a role in the way that you've thought about it? I mean, this notion of like making art as a form of subject creation, or a subject making people aware of themselves as subjects. Is that something that's been featured in what you do, or is it kind of just emerge?
It merges, and it's also a way of working through those ideas, finding a medium that functions in a way that you can express those deep ideas, and how it's can be, how people can engage with it and think about it and go away and do their own research and engagement again. So it's like a spark to stimulate debate, a spark to stimulate thought and awareness. It's not. I'm not saying that it's a fixed and I have all the answers. It's only one strand or one sort of tone to add to a wider body of conversations. Again, there's the methodology. For me, you have to it works for me. Somebody else may have another way of approaching it, and that it'll work for them. So it's open for everybody to find their medium to work through. And this is like film, sound, photography. That I find that quite useful. Again, going through the archives and engaging with the past and the images, and reimagine and remodeling that period again to say that comments on then and now as well. That gives us a sort of understanding of how we got here and where we may be going next. Without resolvement of those past situations, how can we consider the next phase of our development as necessarily a good one? So it is working on that in a non-destructive sort of way, a way that is actually trying to empower people to think about what they see and hear, and how you can use that to be able to inform an analysis of the world as is and as we like it. And that's what works for me. It's like the medium I find is interesting to work with, and it still gives enough play, enough space to sort of be useful.
And just in terms of that question of media, I actually did want to ask kind of maybe it's a little more of a technical question, some of the more philosophical stuff we've been discussing, but obviously again, we've entered this notion of like social media and like media being just ubiquitously present, and I'm just interested in the way that you've kind of considered this notion, because I think of your works as kind of palimpsestic, they stack up, things build up in layers on top of each other, and then social media kind of has this flattening effect where everything kind of somehow takes on the same value. You can watch a horrific video of a war crime, or you can watch a like a cat video or whatever it might be. Like it all kind of becomes flattened. And I'm wondering if if that tension's something that you've thought about in your own practice. Is it something that you've because your works have entered different media spheres. I mean, what do you think of this kind of dynamic between a palimpsestic kind of buildup of history versus this kind of flattening thing of the way that people receive stuff?
I think as technology enables people to gain access to material, off your phone, off your computer, off your iPad, whatever, then it's like, okay, then you've got access. Then there's still work to be done to understand how it's constructed. I think there's going to be, even in the universities, will be a level or a lesson on how to deconstruct and reconstruct what we are seeing in these. What does that mean to see the world in a flicker book kind of way? And then either we aesthetically we want to slow it down to sort of do a deep dive into that material, because there may be like a fast food kind of popcorn sort of relationship, but at some point you either get bloated and say, enough of this, I need a proper meal, I need some vegetables, I need some fruit, and then that rinses through your body, and you reset the clock, and then you start to consider what it is that's important in all of those areas. Again, there may be kernels of things that may stay, but there's again, as people get older and go through that period, they will start to realise maybe that's not the only way to see the world. And as familiar as it is, there may be a way people start to sort of slow that frame down, to do an analysis of that frame and ask questions of it. As much as we've gone through theatre, photography, cinema, TV, now iPad, YouTube, all of that sort of new media kind of thing. At every point, there's somebody saying, "Well, can we look at it in a different way?" And maybe the way that it's made or how it's used, maybe it gets flipped around. There's a TV series called Black Mirror that looks at the modern world from a dystopic kind of view. That's also takes on board that same notion of like, oh, I haven't had any life, and that immediately affects your lifestyle. So that, I think, is interesting. It's like when you start to realise maybe we are living in that Blade Runner sort of world, or where if you don't get enough light, you don't get any oxygen, or you don't get any food, or you're dependent on having how many friends you've got, Facebook or Twitter. So that's having a critical relationship with it, I think is another debate, because it's like it's not necessarily made for me or people like me, but it's like it's a tool that's there, and it's how people use it, or how they deconstruct it to make it work for them, if it can, if it's at all possible. I think that's going to be the maybe one in the next phase is like people say either they will get rid of it all and say no, I'm
going analog.
I don't want to be in that world, and so will grow up and that's all they know. That's the only thing they will be the first thing they engage with, and that may colour their sense of themselves and what they think the world is, or how they can negotiate the way through society. That's it. I think that's it. The work is still to be done on it. That's basically what I'm saying. So, for me, I recognise that it's there. I may not have direct contact with it, but when I do have contact with it, it's like, okay, I know you're there. This is what I think I can do, and then
come what will, I suppose.
Yeah. It's that thing that everybody's got a mobile phone and everybody's got before it was like somebody comes into a bar and they put their phone on the table with like a big grip and battery is damn. Yeah, you're thinking you're a businessman, and it's like, okay, now everybody's got one. So.
No, it's totally true, and I guess I'm also, just again to like kind of round off the conversation maybe with this question about how that technological atmosphere is changing this notion of the way that we relate to, we relate to history itself, right? Like, I think again, it's like it's a great means of disseminating information, but like the truth of that information is now really, really complicated. And of course, you have all these, AI systems that are being developed and the capacity to create self-generating deepfakes and stuff like this. And of course, you've worked with, reconstructing histories in a way in your own work, but like towards a greater truth, towards a truth of, the experience, the experience of that history, the experience of being a subject as who's been emerged from that history. And, we're entering this sphere where machines, like machinic memory, is kind of creating weird, new possible understandings of stuff. And I'm wondering, because like obviously, we've kind of just touched on it a little bit, but like I'm interested in like, thinking about the ways that history will be received in the future. Obviously this notion of a document versus a documentary. One is like kind of static, and another is kind of broadcasting. And you've obviously played a role in some of that. Kind of creating that from from sonic places and things like that. Do you think that like historical awareness is gonna do you feel like it's growing, or or do you, because like I think there is more acceptance of these things, but it is also like it's entering just a messy space now.
But that may be the thing when it becomes more acceptable, and then at the same time we've got the AI sort of phenomenon appearing at the same time. So one hand, people are accepting, but then this technology that can reconfigure, mimic, and reconstruct a narrative. We're thinking, well, if that takes over the sort of like the debate, and that becomes like, well, my history is the history that I say is, and here's the AI, or here's so and so that could articulate the argument. And think, oh, okay. So it's like a ready-made historical timeline. So it's maybe in the academic world it's going to be a great debate, because in one sense you would have to have the evidence. You have to do the due rigor on the debate. It may be like on the a newspaper type, populist kind of position.
Tabloid, yeah.
But then it still requires the research and analysis to be done. That may make it harder, but it still be like, well, if you're not sure, go back to the books, go back to the main,
the offline sort of.
Where the deflection point is, and see what that does. So it'd be like, you wouldn't just trust the information from one source. You'd have to find the other connection points, and to see if it's still repeated, or that to me would mean that people either realize, is this, if they have to put on the box, this is AI generated, this is formed by this, so if it's not identifiable, then it means that you'd have to um, dig a little bit deeper,
Mm.
and then to try and find, yeah, because I'm sure it's going to be there for people that just do the quick surface experience, engagement, and then they'll go off. But if you really want to go to get a proper analysis of it, then you'd have to do that groundwork. It's like saying you're going to go to your doctor and he says, I've got my qualifications from the University of AI. I'm thinking that may not be the best person to sort of start hacking into. So it's that sort of, that's going to be the key thing to sort of like, well, okay, it's provable. Can you follow up the evidence and then say, okay, this is why I'm engaging with this thing. This is it's leading you towards understanding. But I'm sure it's going to be lots of windmills, fake demons that people will be referencing or going for.
Mm.
But I think it's still to sort of have a critical thinking, have a critical analysis, and still have conversations and sort of do research and engage and enjoy. That's the primary thing.